Okay, just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting it on the Hartsdale Neighbors Association YouTube, but I just wanted to get that out there. We are very, very lucky to be joined tonight by Assemblywoman for the 92nd District, MaryJane Shimsky. She is joining us here tonight to talk to us about some of the issues that she's working on at the state budget and some of the issues that specifically affect us here in Hartsdale. My name is Eric Zinger. I'm the president of the Hartsdale Neighbors Association. If you are receiving our emails, that's great. If you are not, you can subscribe by going to our website, hartsdaleneighbors.org, or sending us an email at info@hartsdaleneighbors.org. Lots of good information about things that are going on locally in the town, in the school district, in the fire department, and information about these kind of events, which we are looking to put on. And I know we have another few more scheduled on the calendar potentially for the coming year, including with the new police chief, Kobe Powell, and a few other folks. So thank you for taking the time to be us with here tonight. Thank you, MaryJane, for being with here tonight. We really appreciate you being able to join us for a few minutes to talk about some of the things going on right now.
Glad to be here, Eric.
Thank you. So, obviously you are a first-time Assemblywoman. This is your first term in the Assembly District. You've been in office for about 5 months now. Why don't you start, before we really start jumping into some of the specific issues, tell us a little bit about your experience so far, a little bit about your first budget process, and everything that you've been working on in Albany as you've gotten started.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's here now and everyone who's going to be listening when this is posted later. It's been a very fast ride. This year, as happens after every gubernatorial election year, so every 4 years, the state assembly gets 2 fewer weeks to analyze and make revisions to and renegotiate the budget than they do in the other 3 years, to give either the new governor coming in or give the incumbent governor, who has been busy with other things, 2 additional weeks to prepare for us. So we ended up having approximately 2 months to do due diligence and suggest and negotiate revisions to a $227 billion budget. We got the budget in 32 days, I'm thinking late, which when you take out the 2 weeks that we had shortened, is not a significant period of time in terms of creating problems for our various jurisdictions and other issues, although it will mean that the second part of the legislative session, which is the bill passing in earnest. We always pass a small number of bills as we go, but the bulk of the bill negotiation and passing happens after the budget. So obviously that period was shortened this year. We anticipate that there's not going to be as much legislation passed as a result. With the budget, the vast bulk of the time, including most of the delay, was taken up by the debate over bail reform and the governor's housing compact. For those of you who, I want to turn up the exact wording so I have it in front of me. And of course that never happens, does it? We did end up changing the wording to the bail reform, taking out the concept of using, quote unquote, the least restrictive means with people who are out on bail, and it was changed essentially to allow the judges to tailor it to ensure that people will return. it's, I think that people on both sides, and I say this as someone who practiced criminal law for several years, although it was a long time ago. I don't think the difference in practice will be particularly significant and might not even really be noticeable. But there is that change. And the other thing that we are working on as a legislature is requiring training for the judges that are implementing the law. Because one of the things we kept hearing, and that you all have read in the papers, is, well, we don't understand what this wording means, although the concept of least restrictive means is used in other legal contexts. And we hear that, well, this person got out and committed crimes because of bail reform, when it appeared to all of us that that was a person who could have been detained or kept on high bail. So I think having more light instead of heat on the issue and focusing it on the judges who are practicing will hopefully make the law better implemented. And as judges have questions that cannot be answered, it will give us a blueprint for further fine tuning as well. In terms of the housing compact, the governor was assigning across the board for communities in the New York metropolitan area 3% a year for 3 years housing increases. That's a lot, although a lot of our communities are actually on track to do that. But the problem is, as you know, just from being in your own neighborhood and seeing other neighborhoods, you can't do this as a one-size-fits-all thing, because some communities have more usable space than others. Other communities would have various problems or lack of problems tearing down existing housing. For example, in a lot of our communities, with the transit-oriented development in particular, some of our most affordable or least unaffordable housing is right near the train station. So if that was bought up and torn down so that we could get market rate high rises up, because nothing specified affordability, where would those people go? And remember that many of those people are essential employees in what is a serious labor shortage. And, you know, for years, there are certain folks who complain that New York population is shrinking. It's shrinking. It's because of the high taxes. And truth be told, until very recently, the only population shrinkage was pretty much upstate, which, by the way, has the lowest taxes, also the least amount of economic development. So people left for jobs. What's happening now is the price of housing in the New York metropolitan area has gotten so expensive and so high a percentage of people's paychecks that a lot of our essential employees are looking to move elsewhere. And the reason is the high cost of housing. So we do have to do something about that, but at the same point, we have to do something that's realistic given the conditions on the ground. And I know that there are folks from Westchester County who are meeting with the rest of us and are trying to put together some new legislation in the hopes that we could rekindle the conversation and come up with a plan that will enable more people to afford to live in
I
our
like that
region.
phrase you used, least unaffordable. And I know the governor's plan had an ADU component, and I know that the Greenberg Planning Board is working on presenting their own version of an ADU law that's going to be winding its way through local town government. So interesting stuff. Thank you. So I think by far and away, the most number one thing that people, asked about us to ask or is being talked about or coming up is and this is the it was overwhelming in that regard was the discussion around Edgemont Incorporation or a potential Edgemont Incorporation and what's being done at the state level because it's state law that governs the incorporation process. What's being done to revamp or change that, because I know there's been a number of local home rule requests. There's some groups organizing, and this is not a new thing. This has been going on for several years now. You represent all of Greenburgh except for Edgemont now, because Edgemont has been carved out of the 92nd district. Previously, it was all together in one. Now you represent the 92nd district as redrawn, which is all of Greenburgh plus some Mount Pleasant, but does not include Edgemont. I'm sure you've been following this along. I'm following along the home rule requests, the stories, the different organizations. Talk to me a little bit about what you see as the state role in this process. I know you're on the committee for local governments. Tell me about what you're doing, because I know the number one thing Greenburgh residents ask me is, what can MaryJane do to help us prevent an Edgemont Incorporation?
Okay, first, by way of background, this issue's been with us for 20 years or more at this point. There have been a number of petitions. There's also been, sadly enough, and it's a problem both from the Greenburgh side and the Edgemont side, there's been a lot more contention than efforts at conciliation. And what happens when you end up spending year after year, concentrating on what drives people apart, you end up with people being driven apart. And that's the situation after all these years that I've been faced with as a freshman-led member of the assembly. It turns out that I got a lot of good historical background and a lot of perspective from the chair of the local governments committee, Fred Thiel. He's one of the more senior members of the assembly. He also sits right next to me in chambers. So when we're not commiserating over the Mets, this is one of the things we talked about. And in fact, one of the first conversations I had with him was about Edgemont Incorporation and the issue of incorporation in general. And what he said to me dovetailed very closely with much of what Majority Leader Stewart Cousins also said, which is, with an issue that can have so many unintended consequences in so many parts of the state, nothing is going to move forward unless it's a plan that is applicable across the state. So home rules are out. And it also needs to be something that makes sense in the state as a whole. One of the things that the senator was talking about as we were talking with various folks about this, I don't know how many of your listeners might have been at the Save Greenburgh Coalition meeting a couple weeks ago. But one of the things we have been talking about is the fact that the incorporation laws that exist is very old. Now, the Rockefeller Foundation has done a compendium of incorporation laws throughout the country. We have one of the less restrictive laws. There are things that other states do to potentially restrict the ability of hamlets to incorporate as villages. So we've got that as sort of a general backdrop. In the meantime, the senator, I think before I took office, had asked Pace University to do a study on whether and how the current state incorporation laws might be best updated. I understand that there is a draft of recommendations. I have not seen it yet. I know that the legislators involved, me, Senator Stewart Cousins, and Assemblywoman Paulin, who represents Edgemont, are looking for a time to sit down and be briefed on the findings of that Pace University study. We'll see what kind of roadmap we get from that. Now, in 2019, the aforementioned Assemblyman Thiel had actually put together his effort at a soup to nuts reform of the incorporation law. It suggested a lot of things, and one of them was something he actually got from several other states, which was having the entity that's responsible for analyzing the state finances. In our case, it would be the state comptroller's office, do a study, and if the plan would impose an undue financial burden, the comptroller would have veto authority over it. That was in the 2019 Thiel law. That whole law, including that section, ended up getting withdrawn. I understand from some folks that one of the factors in not being able to move forward with a comprehensive statewide update of our incorporation laws is a lot of the heat over the the Edgemont Incorporation, and having that heat superimposed on the reform package made it really difficult to move forward. So where does that leave us at this point? Well, we now have Edgemont represented by a different member of the assembly. And that, on one hand, that brings certain advantages. On the other hand, it also brings disadvantages. Assemblywoman Paulin is one, I mean, she's got to be one of the 5 to 10 most senior members of the state assembly. She currently succeeded Dick Gottfried, which is a name that I'm sure many of your listeners who know anything about state government is familiar with, as chair of the health committee. She is a very, very powerful presence in Albany. And the result of that is getting something through the assembly is going to mean going through Amy Paulin. And just looking at the map, she has no interest in protecting Greenburgh. She only has an interest in protecting Edgemont.
Yep. Because she doesn't represent any of Greenburgh. She represents the Scarsdale area, Edgemont, and then parts of Southeast White Plains.
Right, some of White Plains, and a few other areas, including Eastchester. But for our purposes, that is an adversary that is very formidable. And when quite frankly, when the original redistricting package was done in 2022, that Edgemont was split off from Greenburgh, I held my head in my hands, because that is going to make
another gift from Mr. Abenanti that we can thank. I'll say it, you don't have to.
Well,
you talked a little bit in the beginning about how it's become, pretty contentious and
yeah,
two sides,
right.
Do you think, let me ask you a two-part question. Do you think there's any hope of reconciling the parties? And if so, do you think that there's a role in that process for you? How do you see that working potentially?
First of all, there have been changes in the cast of characters, and not just in the state legislature. I don't know how many of you know, but Bob Bernstein is moving out of Greenburgh, and his role in much of this, to some extent, has already been taken over, but has been taken over by someone else, Jeff Sherwin. What I often wonder, because remember, this has been going on for 20 years or somewhere thereabouts, right? Is conditions are different. The attitudes and priorities of people moving into town, moving out of town are different.
Cost of debt is different.
Lots of things, yes. And for the cost of debt, of course, is going up even as we speak. And I honestly, I'm not necessarily certain that we would know the results of that if we were to have a referendum. I'm not completely convinced that the results would be a foregone conclusion. But it obviously would be a risk that the town would prefer not to take.
Definitely.
I think, there were various times where under the aegis of Senator Stuart Cousins, that there were efforts to bring both sides to the table over the course of the last maybe 5-6 years. And at various times, one side or another balked at attempts at a serious mediation of some of the issues involved. I don't know how doable it is now. I know that there have been some quiet efforts. Remember, you also have a new county legislator, David Imamura, who, like Tom Abenanti did, both as a county and a state legislator, represent both non-Edgemont unincorporated Greenberg, basically Hartsdale, and Edgemont as well.
Yeah.
So I know he had been making efforts. They have not borne any fruit yet, which I do find concerning. My next step in all of this, because remember, I could introduce 50 bills if I want on this, but I do that, and if they're not going to pass, it's a waste of everybody's time, and it gives people false hope when instead we have to look to see what our higher percentage shots are. I think mediation is still worth trying, but at the same time, I think the next avenue we need to look at is what the recommendations from PACE look like.
Yeah.
And see what effect they would have in this particular situation.
Yeah.
Now, it is also my hope that if the worst were to happen, there's people have estimated the impact on the Hartsdale and Fairview sections of unincorporated Greenberg. Those estimates are all over the place. Edgemont is saying it'd be about 4%. Other people say it's 18%. That's roughly the figure that the Save Greenberg Coalition is using. Senator Stuart Cousins does have money that she got into the state budget for a study trying to give a objective view of what the financial hit would be. And knowledge is always power. And if it's worse than we thought, if it's better than we thought, if it's somewhere in between, that can give us leverage potentially in a negotiation with Edgemont. That can also give us something to think about if we're in the process of reforming incorporation laws, what has to be done to make whole the communities that would suffer.
Yeah, to protect the remaining residents. I mean,
Exactly.
we can study this until the sun comes up. We know that an Edgemont Incorporation would be bad for unincorporated Greenberg. I don't think there is a single resident of TOV who is in favor of this or who wants to see this happen. Let me ask you this, your role, obviously, you've been a county legislator. Now you're in the state, you are looking, it sounds like, most likely to try and pass a state law that would not be a home rule request because of the dynamics that we discussed.
Right.
You know, has the town and town leadership, I mean, Supervisor Feiner is, arguably the most famous politician in Greenberg. You know, has the town been, in your short experience as an assemblywoman, has the town been a good partner to work with? I know one of the criticisms recently was that it seemed like maybe there wasn't great communication between the town board and the representatives in Albany with some of the things that they were doing, and that maybe that is an area that needs to be strengthened going forward.
It absolutely needs to be strengthened. Just to talk to you a little bit, there was that home rule message.
Yep.
That was sent to me as the assembly member and to Senator Stuart Cousins as the state senator. We were close to completely blindsided by it.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
And, some people think that if they treat their opposite numbers on other levels of government essentially like the hired help and say, you've got to do this, so do it, that not only will we jump to it, but that we actually have options available. And as I described to you, we don't have a lot of options available, but one of the things that we do know is pushing home rule messages will only make things worse, because that's what happened the last time they were tried.
Yep.
So I know that after that vote took place, I had conversations with, I believe, 3 out of the 4 councilmen and women. And I talked about the need for sitting down with us and coordinating and talking beforehand, because it's not like we're sitting up in Albany doing nothing about this. Like I said, one of my first days in chambers, I had a more enlightening conversation on this topic than I had in my prior years in elected office. And it gave me a whole new perspective and an understanding of what avenues were going to be closed to us and what avenues had the potential of being open. And if we don't share information back and forth, we're just going to have chaos again. And chaos is not the friend of Hartsdale.
It's the friend of the supervisor, though. Anyway, so look, I don't want to spend all night on incorporation. If I can impress upon you one thing from this meeting or anything at all, it would be how really important this is to TOV, how important this is to everyone in Hartsdale, in Fairview, in unincorporated Ardsley, and unincorporated, this is the single most important issue. And, we need your help on this, because an Edgemont Incorporation, the EIC can say whatever they want. There is no doubt that an Edgemont Incorporation will have tremendously bad impacts on the rest of TOV. So I want to pivot for a minute now.
Everything I can.
Yep. Thank you. I want to pivot now, and I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure, and specifically, flooding and roads, and talk to you about, what's happening in Albany to get additional resources to Greenberg. Because I know that one of the things that was most frustrating to me, since I've lived here in 2013, is it always felt like Greenberg was being shortchanged. I know that from 2015 to 2019, for a period of 4 years, not a single state road in Greenberg was repaved. And we repaved approximately 20% of the state, or a significant percentage of the state roads in the state. And for Greenberg to get none of that money just seemed impossibly, poor. Everyone complains about 9A. Everyone complains about Central Avenue. Tell me what you can do in Albany and what you're working on to bring some of those state resources to, really, our needed areas there.
Okay. We know that our infrastructure, the need to repair our infrastructure is vast. There are a number of different levels we need to work with on that. As a first-year legislator, I took initiative during the budget negotiations, which is generally not done by freshman legislators, certainly not in their first budget season. And I circulated a dear colleague letter and we got over 20 other people signed on to it to urge increases in money in funding for CHIPS and other programs. This would be to repair local roads, municipal roads, county roads. The state roads are not alone in being a mess, although obviously some of those roads have distinguished themselves. But we ended up with an extra $100 million in state aid to our local governments for road repairs. That obviously is distributed throughout the state. So basically what it will do is help take the edge off the last year or so's inflation. But it will, like I said, it will help communities be able to continue with existing road programs at least, if not actually jack things up a little bit. I've also been studying what's been going on with our state roads. And when I was driving around when I was campaigning, there are parts of the district that I did not represent as a county legislator. Route 141 in Mount Pleasant was horrible. Many of us know in Tarrytown, the bridge that goes over 287 on Broadway, that was in god awful shape too. We know that Central Avenue's a mess. Some of those have been repaired in the past year, but we also know, and we got some information from the Construction Industry Council, that DOT Region 8, which includes all of Westchester County, as well as some of the counties to the north of us, and I believe on the other side of the Hudson as well, are getting less aid per road mile than any other DOT region in the state. Now that I know, I've got a sense of what the imbalance is. Once we're done with this legislative session, which will be somewhere between June 8th and June 10th, one of my projects for my summer vacation is trying to figure out the best strategy to, number one, lobby about this in Albany, and number two, figure out what budget lines to ask for in the 2024 budget that will get more money into our part of the state, so that way these roads can get fixed. That's basically where we're going on that. Now, there's one other thing, and this is the dirty truth of the situation. Is I let off with $100 million, which sounds great.
That's nothing.
But then when you divide it by the number of lane miles in in the entire state, it's like I said, it will help ease inflation, but it's not going to do a whole lot more than that. Our need, whether it's roads, whether it's stormwater infrastructure, whether it's wastewater, whether it's broadband, whether it's alternative energy, whether it's the power grid that will allow the alternative energy to get where it needs to go, whether it's Metro North. The appropriations process on the local level, the state level, and even the national level is never going to be enough to solve the problem by itself. We're just too much in the hole at this point. So one of the things that I have been working on in initial months, and it's something that I'd been working on for a few years before I got to the state assembly as well, is I've been working with a group called the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, which can infuse over the next 10 years an extra $5 trillion into the market for infrastructure repairs. We estimate that about 320 billion of that would go to projects within New York State. That's real money. And that would finally help us get caught up with all the things we have to get caught up on.
We got to be starting talking about B's, not M's.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And one of the things that I did was I circulated with Chris Burdick, who is an assemblyman on the northeast corner of Westchester County, a dear colleague letter to send to our congressional delegation, our senators, to President Biden, and to Speaker McCarthy, asking them to enact legislation creating the National Infrastructure Bank. This is not a this year project. This is it's going to be a while before we get there, but no time like the present to start getting the issue on the map and start to educate the folks in Washington about the need and what this bank could do to help meet the need. So I've been working on that. I also found that one of the things that talking one-on-one with members about anything does too is it helps you cement relationships, which when we start doing the hard stuff, like how to remake the incorporation law, those relationships are something that I can draw on as well. And that's obviously very helpful, because being a legislator is being in one of the most collaborative occupational groups there is. And if you just go up to somebody and say, I have a great bill, that's the first time you ever talk to them, you ain't going to get far.
Yep.
So this has really broken the ice with me and a lot of other people. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, the MTA, the Hartsdale train station behind you, among many others. I think I win as the assembly representative with the largest number of Metro North train stations in district. We ended up giving several $1 billion in different parts of the budget to help the MTA out of their operational and capital difficulties. But Metro North alone is going to need tens of billions of dollars over the next several years to get all of the tracks, all of the stations, everything up to standard where we want them to be. And if one organization can come up with the most expensive way to fix something, it's the MTA. So one of the things I started looking at, and I have to give credit to my son, Isaac, who's a real public policy maven out in Cleveland, Ohio. He found something online. I have started following it. The Mannion School of, I believe it's Public Administration at NYU, is doing a multi-part study of the MTA's capital process. And the first one, which was on the Second Avenue subway project, concluded that the project could have been done for a lot less money. The time frame of projects are just way too long. And when you're talking about paying for labor and so on, time is money. The other thing is, which I found very interesting, is the size of the tunnels they dug were much larger than other metropolises in this planet dig for similar types of underground systems. And obviously when you're digging through igneous rock, that's a great way to drive up the cost too. So I am hopeful. I've been talking with Assemblyman Ken Zabrowski, who chairs the Committee on Corporations, Commissions, and Authorities, which is the committee that does the most with regulating the MTA, that we could do some legislative oversight and see what we could do to nudge the MTA into a more cost-effective way of doing capital projects.
Well, if you're trying to make the MTA more cost effective and cost efficient, you have certainly picked I think you have a better chance of reconciling Edgemont and Greenberg. That is
Well,
certainly a big
here's
task
the
there.
deal, though. We have to do it.
Yeah. The
There's
rest
no
of the stuff
choice.
is
It has to
raindrops
be.
compared to what we're
Yeah.
talking about there. Yeah. Okay. Um, That's really good stuff. Thank you for that. That was some good information there. I know we had a couple of people here. If there's anyone who does want to ask a question, if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, or even just unmute yourself and go ahead, do want to give people who attended live here a chance, if they have a question for Mary Jane and want to ask it, to go ahead and do so. So, Carol, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Good
Hi, Carol.
evening, Mary Jane. How are you this evening?
Okay, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. It's good to see you again this evening. And thank you for all the discussion you gave us about the incorporation. The one thing I wanted to ask, you mentioned that the money has been allotted in the budget for the fiscal study. Have we determined yet who will be doing that study?
We have not, and that is something that it's a Senate initiative. So it's going to be the Senate who presumably will be interpreting the terms of the add to the budget. I think at this point, what I'm hopeful for is that, as I said, the senator will be hosting the meeting on the Pace University study. And hopefully if that happens soon, I'll be able to ask her there exactly what's going to be happening with that money and who's going to decide.
If you have any influence, you might want to mention that there are serious concerns about the faculty at Pace, because we know that there are already many people there who are strongly affiliated with Edgemont. So
Okay.
it's possible that the study would not be as unbiased as we would hope.
Thank you for letting me know that. And one of the great things about, I don't mean to put my colleague on the spot, but one of the nice things about having a relationship with someone like Fred Thiel is that he's someone I can bounce a thought off of, and I'm going to get something which is pretty close to an independent response. So that's why I said about relationships. You really need to develop relationships with the right person. And that obviously is one way to check against what Pace tells us. Seeing what's in the Rockefeller Institute, I think it was called a study, but it was really more of a compendium of all the different laws. Checking against that as well to see where in the realm of reasonability it falls. So I will be looking at that. I thank you so much for giving me one more thing to put in the mental checklist, and we'll continue talking.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else with a question? Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Dan, you're muted if you can go ahead
Yeah,
and
hi,
unmute
now I'm
yourself.
muted.
Yep.
Hi, Mary Jane. Thanks so much for joining us. This is very informative. I'll get back to the roads question again, because this is my obsession, having lost many tires on Central Avenue.
Every
In the
time
last
Dan
week.
loses a tire, I get a text from him. So,
And-
Well, I'll
And,
tell you what, Dan, the next time CC me on it too.
Yeah, I even went to the, even one time, I had 2 tires I lost. I went to the state through the whole process, and to state roads, and they denied it because no one had pointed out the specific potholes before. Whatever. My question is more: what is the best way for us as residents, taxpayers, voters to advocate to the state DOT to get them to pave this darn road? I mean, it's I know the budgetary issues are major, and I know as you talked, there's a long range thinking that's going on, but we need short term thinking as well, because it's essentially a regressive tax, on people to have these. Everyone drives cars regardless of their their income, and they're paying for rims and tires, and and this damage is happening. It's getting worse.
here's what I recommend to you, and anyone else who's hearing this can do the same thing. I'm supposed to do a drive-through of the greatest jaw-rattling hits with DOT in another week and a half or so. So what you should do is if you could send it to my office, shimsky@nyassembly.gov. You can send it to my home email, mjshimsky@verizon.net. You could send it to my cell phone via text, 914-260-0209. Let me know where the big problems are. And we can start, I can take the DOT Region 8 director over the spots that you enjoy so much and see how he feels about them. And then we'll take it from there. To get capital done, obviously there has to be a certain amount of lead time. It's quite possible that at least part of Central Avenue might be in the hopper already. But if it's not, we need to get it there. And in the meantime, what I used to call it, mine was in the county, was we're going to have to do some temporary repairs so people can hold body and soul together until the repaving gets done. And that is one of the things I can talk to him when we travel over it. So please get me your recollection of the worst spots. Anyone else? If you travel Central Avenue, if you travel 9A, if you travel 287, if there are particular spots that you want us, that you want me to take the Region 8 director over, please let me know what they are.
Thank you. The Taconic goes in that as well. That's a state road, isn't it? I think.
That is a state road, and I know that there are sections, especially sort of in Upper Greenberg, but also going into Mount Pleasant, which are pretty horrible as well.
Right near Westchester Medical Center, that whole stretch. Hazardous.
Yeah, so you could include those as well.
All right, I think, Jane, I think you had a question, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And full disclosure, I am not from Hartsdale, but Eric was kind enough to invite me to sit in because we've been discussing issues that affect all of Westchester. And, you know, I followed very closely the governor's housing compact proposals and all the controversy that was generated. And my observation is that it was so polarizing. I'm wondering how we're going to now go about finding areas of agreement and ways to move forward with this. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, what I found really interesting during the process, because obviously, you know, we spent weeks talking about this in conference, the majority members of the state assembly. And I can't divulge what happened in conference, but I think what I can tell you is that we're a very diverse bunch. We have a lot of suburban members, particularly in kind of the arc around New York City. Most of our members are in New York City, and they're faced with a situation where it was recently determined that half of the city cannot afford their basic living expenses, and the main driver of that is housing costs. And we have a lot of upstate members who have their own unique issues, and they were part of the compact as well. When I saw what was done in the Assembly One House budget, and that may be something if you, I don't know how nerdy you are about this stuff, but if you really like to take deep dives, you may want to look for the New York Assembly's One House budget on the Assembly website. If you have trouble finding it, let me know and we'll make sure we get you a link.
Thanks.
And I was very surprised at the degree to which that one house budget was able to incorporate the needs, the concerns, and the interests of such a diverse group of us into something that felt fairly coherent and likely to be effective. The governor, as I understand it, had certain concerns about some of the tenants' rights issues that came up. I mean, the buzzword that has created a certain amount of controversy is good cause eviction, but there are other issues such as tenant vouchers and so on. Although there seems to be less contention about those. There, it's the matter of figuring out how to pay for them. But we need to find, I think, on one level with the three entities, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor. We need to, I think, maybe have some basic conversations first about what we do about the fact that we have so many people who can't afford a decent place to live. And the fact that we are bleeding population, not because of taxes, we are bleeding population because of housing costs. And I think that what really has to be done is, I think people really need to get into each other's shoes a little bit more. This is more process than anything else, but people have to understand what it's like to be living as a professional with a graduate degree in a one-bedroom apartment with 2 nuclear families. I think people have to understand what it's like to be a small landlord and be really concerned about whether you're going to be able to afford to make the repairs that you know you need to make to your building. How it feels to know that, you know, of the thought behind this housing compact, and this is what I found so frustrating about it, is the supply and demand curves were supposed to take care of everything. If we build enough housing, the price will drop, and when the price drops, it will become affordable. But the problem is, the developers that are going to be building what will be market rate housing are going to be putting so much money of their own out that if the rents or the purchase prices take substantial drops, that can put them in serious financial jeopardy. So everyone is potentially near a financial breaking point, which is why we all need to sit down and understand that no matter what string we pull, it's all going to come back to every single one of us. And once we understand that, I think we can start having some more fruitful conversations about how to decide strategically where to build, how to decide what to build, what price points and income levels to target, and what to do about infrastructure that is needed to support the housing. People don't think too much about sewers because they're underground. But in the governor's housing compact, she put $250 million in statewide to help with infrastructure to support all this new housing. $250 million would not be enough to fix the sewers to handle the existing housing stock in one of our cities in Westchester County in particular. What's the rest of the state supposed to use? We've got a lot of serious issues. We may be nearing the point where, I don't know how many of you, I have a PhD in history, which means I talk about wonky things all the time. But since Napoleon III rebuilt Paris in the mid-1800s, we may not have had a moment like the one that we're facing right now. And it's going to take the same kind of bold action, but real serious thoughtfulness as to how to get this done. And finances are going to have to play a much bigger role than they did back then.
I know people in Hartsdale certainly care about sewers. I know downtown Hartsdale floods every time it rains.
Mhm.
You know, we're approaching an hour. One thing I wanted to, I think we're going to wrap up shortly, but I did want to touch on one last point, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Because you talked a lot about affordable housing and access to affordable housing. And one of the things that's happened recently in Greenberg was a home rule request to change the taxation structure for condos and condominiums. And the governor signed the bill for Greenberg only
Right,
and vetoed the bill for statewide.
right.
And what that means essentially is a large tax increase on new multifamily housing. You talked about least unaffordable housing previously, and in most cases, that's what multifamily is. You know, what did you think about that home rule request, the governor voting only for or only signing the Greenberg specific law, and the impact that that might have on housing prices and things like that?
There's a real risk of serious problems with it. And I know that I've talked with some of the members of the town board with that. And there is a certain level of concern, but I don't think necessarily as much concern as there needs to be. I know that that statewide bill is kicking around again. I really think that we have to think very carefully about perhaps how to target things better, how to think about it better. I mean, I understand the need for it, which is to take some of the pressure off our single family homeowners. But if we take some of the most or the least unaffordable housing that we have under construction and increase the taxes too much, we're going to end up with the same problem that we would have had with the housing compact.
Yeah, I think it's going to unfortunately result in less tax revenue being generated, not more. Okay, well, look, MaryJane, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. You know, we really appreciated your insight. I know you shared earlier your assembly email address and things like that. Why don't you just, as we wrap up here, and again, anyone who has a question for Hartsdale Neighbors Association, info@hartsdaleneighbors.org. If there's someone you'd like to see us host one of these discussions with, let me know. If there's a topic you're interested in working on, Hartsdale Neighbors really works on the things that the people who are active in it work on. I am interested in politics and care about that kind of stuff. And that's why, I wanted to reach out and host MaryJane tonight. So MaryJane, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. If you could maybe just, I know you put it in the chat, just let people know if they do have a question or something that you can work on as their state representative, how they can reach you. And, we'll wrap up from there.
Okay, that is my state assembly email address, shimskym@nyassembly.gov.
Was Shimsky
I don't
taken?
monitor it every day, but I do have staff that does, and we'll see what we can do. It's kind of embarrassing, but since I don't call my own phone number very much, I still don't know my office phone number very well. But it is available at the nyassembly.gov website. And I will also put in the chat.
I have it. So the Albany office is 518-455-5753. And the Tarrytown office is 914-631-1605. And I'll paste a link for that in the chat as well.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I look forward to talking to all of you. Good
Have a
night.
good night.